launching the report We Belong Here, Framework for Human Rights for Australian of African Descent. My name is Emelda, and I'm really delighted to be your MC for this special launch. Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders both past and present, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. This event was organized by the African Australian Advocacy Centre in partnership with RMIT University and Western Sydney University. It's hosted by the City of Sydney in response to the findings of the United Nations Working Group of Experts on the African people of African descent during their visit in 2022. African Australian Advocacy Centre extends its appreciation to RMIT University and Western Sydney University and recognizes their invaluable support in bringing this report to fruition and values their ongoing partnership and eagerly anticipates further collaboration. The African Australian Advocacy Centre also expresses gratitude to the City of Sydney for graciously hosting the event. Sincere appreciation goes to Councillor Waskam Emelda for her significant role in facilitating the hosting. The African Advocacy Centre invites other stakeholders to join forces and partner with implementing these recommendations. Through collective effort, we can attain the objectives. Last but not least, special thanks goes to the volunteers who are tirelessly working to ensure that the Australian advocacy and the African Australian advocacy into what it is today. The volunteers are the backbone of what has been accomplished and what will continue to be achieved. To commence the launch, we would now like to watch a short video presentation titled From Recommendation to Action Symposium. Thank you.
The United Nations have just released a report detailing human rights violations against people of African descent living in Australia and recommendations moving forward. The report highlighted 125 issues around discrimination, integration, detention, policy, education, and health. In response, the African Australian Advocacy Centre and Western Sydney University Social Justice Network held the event Recommendations to Action to discuss plans for local level action and government lobbying.
As we stand in this room, it is time to ask a vital question: where from here? This question marks a transition point, a moment of reflection and a call to action.
What we know is that we need to capitalise on the way to the Working Party's first ever visit to Australia in challenging those in positions of power to prioritise the group's findings and recommendations.
There is work to be done in health, education, employment, integration, discrimination, detention, and policing of African Australians.
Racism disempowers people, racism excludes people, racism isolates, racism silence, racism take away your dignity. One thing racism does is also mystifying structures. All the bureaucracy that we sort of need to engage with is so mystified, so that we don't understand how it works. And so we don't complain. and so we don't see the racism. So in Australia, racism for me is embedded in all the structures.
Even though a lot of my work also talks about the politics of blackness and racial trauma, but when people came to speak to me, they'll speak to me from this concept of every time I experience racism or every time I feel excluded, I feel like someone has taken my dignity away. And this is what people are telling me dignity is. It is to be seen as a complete and full human being. They're not saying, I even want people to do these extra things to me. No, just seen, just recognize, just to be made to feel like you're a complete human being, existing and supporting and contributing as an included citizen in Australia.
I think your advocacy and your education must begin with your government. Your government at the level of the Commonwealth, but also your government at the level of the state and any other local governments. Because these are the people who are responsible for governance, for participation, public participation. These are the people who make the laws. These are the people who advocate the law. And these are the people who implement what your legislatures say. And so your government has to obviously be a very, very key audience for you to engage.
So as we embark on this transformative journey, we understand the significance of policy and legislative alignment. We have also started conducting a comprehensive review of existing laws and policies to identify areas where alignment with the UN recommendation is needed. We will further our collaboration with legal experts, lawmakers, and human rights advocates to draft and advocate to amend legislation to promote equality and combat racism.
So today we are gathered for this symposium to tell a way forward on the recommendations from the United Nations Working Group on people from African descent. And we've had some really great speakers from academia, from the community, and we've had a great conversation about it all. And it's very interesting themes which are really framed around empowerment and making sure that we're not using deficit models, but actually using, what was the word they used for it?
A strength-based approach.
The key takeaway today from this forum is two things: to educate and advocate. So to educate the public, so they understand that African Australian community is an asset, is not a burden. Then to advocate for the issues that people from Africa and Bible face. Also advocate for the success that people from Africa will bring all good or harm here. So today, it's a very good platform to bring in people from different sectors: academic, community, human rights, and legal sector, to discuss how we can implement the UN recommendations, put them into action by involving every people from every sector. So it is our responsibility to implement those recommendations.
Next, I would like to invite Councillor Waskam Emelda Davis to give an opening address. Councillor Emelda Davis is the first Black woman elected to serve on the City of Sydney Council in its 180 years, and is a representative of the Clover Moore Independent Team. Emelda is also a second-generation-born Australian South Sea Islander, a descendant of a Pacific slave trade to New South Wales in 1847. A passionate volunteer, community builder, and long-term resident of Piedmont for over 2 decades, Emelda has worked effectively across the corporate and grassroots sectors, including as an advisor to the state and federal government agencies on culturally specific Indigenous knowledge. In serving the city, Emelda is the Community Committee, the Lord Mayor's Delegate on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Panel. The Lord Mayor's delegate on the Multicultural Advisory Panel, a dedicated advocate for the Australian South Sea Islanders. During Emelda's first term on council, the Blackbirding South Sea Islanders' 175th anniversary was recognized through an annual flag raising as part of council's resolution to recognize and support Australian South Sea Islanders to follow up, and a follow-up letter was also sent to 500 councils across Australia and encourage others to follow suit. As a founder of ASSI Port Jackson, Emelda's achievements include 2020 Carl's Panel for Women's Business, Women for Election Australia Ambassador, awarded New South Wales Parliamentary Recognition Statement by the Member of Sydney and Legislative Assembly, Mr. Alex Greenwich. New South Wales Premier's Multicultural Community Settlement Services International Human Rights Award. Emelda is also the first ASSI person to complete an SSI oral history thesis, Children of the Sugar Slaves, Black and Resilient, recipients of 2017 Rotary Inspirational Woman, Ultimo, PS Sydney, Inspirational World Medal, 2016 New South Wales Woman of the Year, and local 2015 New South Wales Council of Pacific Communities, Stronger Communities Award, and 2022 International Council of Monuments and Sites, Caring for the Country Committee Award. An ongoing champion for climate justice and social housing, Emelda sees her time on the council as a privilege to work with all communities and bring about meaningful change. It is a great honor to welcome Councillor Waskam Emelda.
Oh, thank you so much, Siobhan. It's so wonderful to see you again, and I really appreciate you supporting today and that huge, wherever Phyllis Drager is, introduction. I really appreciate Phyllis with my council support. My office is the first black office on the City of Sydney Council. But we're sailing the seven seas. We're all good. I just want to acknowledge all the leaders in the room, because this work doesn't come without collaboration, and that's what this looks like. You know, we are a black collective, can I say that? I just want to acknowledge Fungai too, because we've done some work in the past. But I'm going to just read this speech. It's going to be a bit repetitive, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity to participate as a part of this meaningful work. So good morning everyone, and welcome to the African Australian Advocacy Report launch. My name is Waskam. Waskam is my Vanuatu traditional name in recognition of leadership. It allows me to stand in the Nakamal and speak amongst the chiefs. Can you believe it? So when I go to Vanuatu, if I've got issues, I can actually say to the men, because the women, you know, sit around the Nakamal, it's like a grass hut. And if we have issues, we take that concern to the Nakamal. So I've been recognised for the leadership that our board, Australian South Sea Islanders Port Jackson, do. I want to recognise my daughter and my son, who should be here.
He's on Zoom. He couldn't make it. He's on Zoom.
Oh, my God, that's good. So, but the great work that they've done at such a young age, and it's really about empowering our youth and really providing and we're all family, right? So we're all connected. So when people talk about conflict of interest and challenges around that, it's about how you manage that in terms of good governance. So family, not family, we'll all find that we're connected in one way, shape or form. History, yeah? Slavery. I digress. I'm the first black woman on the City of Sydney Council since it was founded in 1842, some 180 years ago. And with that, I'm a proud representative on the governing team for the City of Sydney, and that is Lord Mayor Clover Moore. You may or may not know her, but but she is a formidable force. I acknowledge the Gadigal people, one of the 29 clans of the Eora Nation, elders past, present, and First Nations people here today. There are residents from some 200 countries living in our city, and I acknowledge their ongoing contribution to our vibrant city life. I'd like to acknowledge Noel Zihabamwe. Yeah, our founder, current chairperson of the African Australian Advocacy Centre. I first met Noel and his beautiful wife Delphine quite some time ago through a community dinner with the Sydney Jewish Board of Deputies. That was a while ago, who have done significant work in the multicultural space, and they've played a huge role in collaborating with the organisation I founded, in 2010, in supporting Australian South Sea Islanders Port Jackson, furthering or advancing our cause to the broader community. I'd also like to acknowledge and show my respects to Dr. Barbara Reynolds, Chair of the United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, Professor Justine Nolan, Director of the Australian Human Rights Institute, Lorraine Finlay, Australian Human Rights Commissioner, Professor Althea Pasami Nesde, excuse my pronunciation, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Engagement and Advancement, and Chair of the Western Sydney University Social Justice Network. Dr. Sarah Williams, an academic board member of the African Australian Advocacy Centre, Matasefe Molala, an academic board member of the African Australian Advocacy Centre, and finally Professor Kathomi Gatri, Senior Research and Policy Advisor, and all those leaders in the room, as I said. In December 2022, I was asked by Noel to present to the visiting cohort for the Working Group of People of African Descent, whose research informed today's response by the African Australian Advocacy Report. My presentation to the working group was hosted at the Zebra Lounge. It's a restaurant down in Piedmont, situated on what was historically known as Sydney's Sugar Wharf, CSR Sugar Refinery, which received the sugar cane to be refined that was cut by Pacific slaves, my grandfather's people. It was there that the working group heard of the first time the history of blackbirding to Australia, and of the intersectionality through kinship and bloodlines that our descendants have with African and Pacific peoples. The historical connection between people of African descent and Australia dates back to the first fleet in 1788 and the ongoing labour, like the first sugarcane being planted in New South Wales by a Caribbean man, to the Torres Strait Islands, where people of African descent worked across fisheries and as early as the 1800s or 1860s. One of the more prominent family names of Jamaican descent are the Pitt families in our Torres Strait Islander communities, across First Nations communities. Others names are communities that are East and West African origin, the Tambo families, the Malamu families, the Togo and Nauru, to name a few of those names in our communities. Australian South Sea Islanders Port Jackson is incredibly grateful for the further opportunity in 2022 to 2023 to present again online to the 32nd session for the United Nations Working Group Experts, People of African Descent, and a further opportunity being able to present in person at Geneva at the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commission for the special event of the regional meeting for Asian and the Pacific region for people of African descent. My story is representative of many stories in Australia which show that there is intersectionality and diversity within the Black Oceanic demographic, as there are many connections back to the continent of Africa, and my family is another example of that. My children are West African, and my father came to Australia in the 1950s from the Caribbean island of Grenada via the UK. Therefore, my bloodlines represent 9 countries of Africa, with the strongest DNA being of 30% Nigerian. Can I get an amen? I've dedicated most of my working life in advocating for diversity and recognition of the historical injustices faced by Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander and my grandparents and great-grandparents people due to the practice of blackbirding of the Pacific. This practice was modelled on Atlantic slavery, or the Atlantic slave trade, where 1.5 million Indigenous and Asian peoples were trafficked as part of a circular economy building throughout Asia-Pacific, building the Asia-Pacific region, with the influx of some 60,000 men, some women, and children unknown to Australia. Blackbirding is a practice which has resulted in severe consequences such as a displacement within a racial hierarchy, societal inclusion in integration challenges, and limitations in resettlement with historical and new Pacific communities. Some might even say our Pacific Australian labour mobility scheme replicates remnants of the challenges faced by our forebears, as today some 39,000 seasonal workers have been flown into Australia to support our agriculture, aged care and meat work industries. Through my work, excuse me, I always get this wrong in notice when I do these speeches, it's terrible. Through my work with the federal, state governments, community organisations and more recent work on local council, the City of Sydney has resolved to recognise and support Australian South Sea Islanders and the historical practice of blackbirding, which is derived from the Atlantic slave trade. Another resolution of Council was my notice of motion to strengthen commitments to address systemic and institutional racism across the workplace here at the City of Sydney. Local council outreach services for seasonal workers, those 39,000 that I just spoke about, and this particular event hosted by my office to support the advancement of people of African descent in Australia and beyond. My office is the first councillor office in the City of Sydney to be also staffed by people of First Nations, Pacific and African descent in representing, because Tabita Awaji is from Ghana and she's joined us just recently as a volunteer working with Phyllis, family along me, representing our multicultural Australian lived experience. It is crucial to promote a voice of African Australians as they are part of our constituency and have contributed significantly to our economy, building with little recognition. The promotion of such a voice is what this report launch aims to achieve. The African Australians Advocacy Coalition was born out of ongoing consultation with African communities with a clear vision to see Australians and African descent recognised as an integral part of our multicultural society. The recent visit of the working group of experts on people of African descent shed light on the urgent issues facing African Australians, from racial stratification and marginalisation leading to difficulties in assimilation and violations of human rights. The working group of experts for people of African descent findings underscore the need for immediate action. It is imperative that we address these challenges head on and work towards a society where every individual is valued and respected. As we reflect on the working group of experts of people of African descent findings and recommendations, advocating for change is paramount. From promoting cultural awareness, which is something that you can look at partnering with the City of Sydney to do and moving forward, to bridging gaps in educating and employment opportunities, there is much work to be done. Community representation in policy decisions, access to mental health support and tailored integration programs are essential components of this comprehensive approach. The AAAC's unique positioning, rooted in the critical transformative paradigm and relationality, guides our efforts towards social justice by fostering critical discussions and building sustaining relationships. We aim to generate increased fairness in our social fabric. Through this lens, we recognise the interconnectedness of humanity and the importance of enduring freedom from racial injustice for all. As we embark on this journey together, let us remain committed to our shared goals of justice, equality and inclusivity. By standing in solidarity and advocating for change, we can create a brighter future for African Australians and all members of our diverse society. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Waskam, Emelda Davis. Now we will hear from the Chair of the African Australian Advocacy Centre, Noel Zihabamwe, who will give an address about the overview of the report and its importance for the African community. Noel Zihabamwe is a multi-award-winning professional human rights advocate and community leader. Currently, he works as the Multicultural Community Engagement Coordinator at Settlement Services International, SSI, in the Multicultural Child and Family Program. He is also a research consultant at Cultural and Indigenous Research Centre, Australia. Additionally, Noel serves as a writer advisory board member at the Australian Human Rights Institute at the University of New South Wales, bridging academic research with real-world rights issues. Noel is also advisory board member at the Refugee Advice and Casework Services, a non-profit organization providing essential legal support to people who have fled persecution and to find safety and certainty in Australia. Noel is a former chairman of the Rwandan community and New South Wales former president of the Federation of Rwandan Communities in Australia. Noel holds a diploma in community services, a bachelor's degree in social science, and a master's degree in policy and social research. And he speaks multiple languages, including French, English, Swahili, Kinyarwanda, Kirundi. As a founder and the chairperson of the African Australian Advocacy Centre, Noel plays a pivotal role in advocating and advancing research and policy outcomes for African communities.
It is a coincidence that today it's a Harmony Day.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes, so it's a Harmony Day and also international, it's the United Nations International Day for the elimination of the racial discrimination. So it's a time for all of us, especially in this room, to reaffirm our commitment to creating a society free from discrimination, free from biases, free from prejudices, also free from all injustices that human beings may face. First and foremost, good morning everyone. So it is, I want to start by acknowledging the presence of each and everyone of you here today. In particular, I want to thank our speakers. Know that what their names have been acknowledged. I also want to thank the African Australian President members, our partners, government and non-government representatives, community and faith leaders from African community, also from no-African community. Last but not least, I also want, of course, to thank our host, Councillor Emelda. I'm honored to stand before you today as we gather to launch a landmark report by the African Australian Press Centre in partnership with Almighty University and also Sydney University. In response to recommendations put forth by the UN Working Group of experts on the African State. Historically, people of African descent have a long and rich history in Australia. From the arrival of the first fleet to the present day. During this time, African Australians have made significant contributions to the cultural, sporting, academic, and economic life of Australia for the benefit of all Australians. In recent years, there has been a notable surge in the number of individuals migrating to Australia from Africa. Those newcomers arrive with a multitude of motivations. Some seek employment opportunities as skilled migrants, while others come to pursue education as international students. Additionally, many are refugees fleeing conflict-ridden regions and oppressive regimes, seeking safety and stability in Australia. Despite the diversity in their reasons for migration, they all harbor a common aspiration, a hope for a better future. Although their migration journeys may vary, they are united by their shared dream for a brighter tomorrow. Before further exploring the significance of the report, please allow me to provide an overview of the invaluable work undertaken by the African Australian Advocacy Centre, which I chair. The African Australian Advocacy Centre was founded in Sydney, particularly in Western Sydney. I remember precisely in St. Mary's, in a very tiny home. That was a few years ago. Then, since then, AAAC has expanded nationwide. Our membership spans from metropolitan to regional areas across the country, united by a common purpose to empower Australians of African descent to reach their full potential. Our vision is to see Australians, as Emelda said, to see Australians being recognized as integral members of our multicultural society and to strengthen social cohesion and equality. From a partnership perspective, the AAAC has broadened its collaborative efforts with various organizations, including universities, community organizations, human rights organizations, and all levels of government. The report being launched today reflects the expertise and insights of both experts and committee members. It will show the major challenges and opportunities faced by African Australians, including racial profiling, educational challenges, discrimination, trauma, and mental health issues. It is also a result of research by African Australian community members, academics, in line with the UNWG Party recommendations, embodies both challenges and resilience within the community. The report highlights a joint effort to address complex issues faced by African Australians. We acknowledge that there are issues as it is witnessed in the report. Also, we have positive programs that may answer those issues, which include research projects to identify the core issues that people from African descent face, youth mentoring programs, because if we don't work with the youth, if you are not together with the youth, if you do not mentor our youth, then there's no proper future for our community. We also have African Cultural Awareness Program, where we run this program to educate that Africa is not a country, Africa is a continent. That Africa does not have only one language or one religion. Africa has many languages, many religions. We also run mental health and financial literacy programs to empower our people psychologically, mentally, and also especially those who have no education background to understand how they can manage their financial literacy. So for my financial projects. We also have student work placement program designed to prepare university students for the practical demands of the workforce. especially we started this program focusing on Western Africans, but now we have also many people coming from every community. We also focus on referrals to external services, which is very important because African Social Care Center is entirely run by volunteers. We have now no funding from anyone or from anywhere. So when we have people that we can't support, we do rely on external services who can provide such extra support. Through the dedicated efforts of the AAAC, supported by a diverse range of stakeholders in practical and in programs such as the ones I just mentioned, we have embarked on a journey to champion the rights and the well-being of African descent communities across the nation. The report being released today not only sheds light on the challenges faced by our communities, also highlights our resilience and potential. However, we cannot continue doing this alone. Therefore, we would like to collaborate with the government, academic institutions, private sectors, including law firms and any other stakeholders that are in tune with our cause to implement those recommendations. In the spirit of the unity and collective approach of collective action, we extend our invitation to all present here and not present to join us in this journey. The report is not just a documentation problem, it is also stands as a statement to resilience and innovation. Together, let us strive to implement the recommendations outlined in the report, paving the way for a more equitable and inclusive society where every individual, regardless of background, color, and tribe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Noel, for your hard work. Now let's shift our focus to global perspectives on human rights and equity for people of African descent. We will hear via video conferencing from the chair of the United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, Dr. Barbara Reynolds.
Hello, Australia. I'm so grateful to be speaking with you today across the oceans. I'm grateful for the technology. I'm grateful that the world stops on March 21 to look at some important issues. But I'm also very grateful that AAAC has, by dint of hard work and perseverance, managed to bring all of us to this point where it can launch a framework for advocacy, for protection, for promotion of the rights of people of African descent in Australia. Let me say from the outset that when we advocate for the rights of people of African descent, the whole world benefits. That's something that we've learned along the way by looking at gender and looking at disability. So I want to salute, first of all, the partners who have gathered with AAAC, City of Sydney, MIT, and others. I want to assure you that what you're doing today is of utmost importance. I think this quote was attributed to Edmund Burke, and he said, "Evil triumphs when good people remain silent." And so your presence here today is a physical testament that signifies the importance of the work that AAAC is doing. I'm grateful for your support, for your collaboration, and for your commitment to this cause. For AAAC itself, I wanted to remind you that as you keep walking, how important it is that you continue to engage partners, that you continue to keep a focus on the mandate and not to be sidetracked here or there. You remember how you started with integrity and purpose. That's important. I want to ask of you that you would reach out in solidarity with other causes in Australia, around the world. When you do so, when we do so, we strengthen not just our work, but we strengthen the work of all people who are focused on human rights. And finally, I wanted to ask all Australians of African descent, as you gather in Australia, as you look at the next generation, we've seen some remarkable things happen in our lifetime. It is not insignificant that the world has taken note that for the first time in its history, the UK is governed by people other than white males. I'm glad that there are females in that group, but also it's significant to note that not only are they men of color, but they're men of different religions. So there's a Christian, there's a Hindu, there's a Muslim. The fight ahead of us is not for the swift, but for the sure. And I want to assure you that even while all of this progress is being made, and we're seeing remarkable signs of the clawback, the denigration of DEI, the denigration of the use of the word hope, the denigration of claims for reparatory justice, we just need to keep on walking. So to all people of African descent in Australia, I urge you to continue to walk together. The continent from which your ancestors came is large, but it's a single continent. And while all of us come from different countries, it's important for us to remember that our roots are the same. Our future is inextricably linked. And if we continue to focus on what we have to do, success is assured. So celebrate today. It's a framework. It's not a blueprint. It brings everyone in. It's inclusive. It's expansive. But the most important thing today is that it's a step in the right direction. So, Noel, I salute you. I salute all AAAC. And I hope you have a lovely celebration today, remembering that there's a lot of work ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. Next, I would like to welcome Professor Justine Nolan, the Australian Human Rights Institute Director at the University of New South Wales, who will give insights on the report and its implication for Australian human rights discourse. Professor Justine Nolan is a professor in the Faculty of Law and Justice at the University of New South Wales and Director of the Australian Human Rights Institute. Justine's research focuses on the intersection of business and human rights, in particular, supply chain responsibility for human rights and modern slavery. Her 2019 co-authored book, Addressing Modern Slavery, examines how consumers, business, and government are both part of the problem and the solution in curbing modern-day slavery in global supply chains. Other recent books include International Law of Human Rights and Business and Human Rights from Principles to Practice. She teaches international human rights law and related courses on global law development, globalization and business and human rights. Justine works closely with business, government, and civil society and has been a key driver of the Australian business and human rights movement. In 2019, she was named Academic of the Year at the Australian Law Awards. From 2016 to 2019, she has served as an Associate Dean Academic at University of New South Wales Law. Welcome, Professor Justine.
Thank you so much to you all, Thank you very much for the kind invitation to speak today, and as always it's a privilege to speak from the lands, the unceded lands of the Gadigal people, and I think particularly their ownership and kinship with this land is particularly pertinent to the issues that we are discussing today. I'm grateful for Emelda in raising the many issues, particularly around blackbirding in Australia, that is often passed over and overlooked as part of our history, that we moved on from, but not always answered for. I was privileged to meet Noel a number of years ago as we've been working together with a number of other people to try and seek answers for the tragic disappearance of his brothers. And it's been a real privilege to work with him and also watch him as he moves to the next stage and founding this wonderful organisation. Following their visit to Australia, the UN Working Group noted that people of African descent living in Australia have experienced significant inequity, to put it mildly. What's surprising about this claim to me is that it was and it continues to be an absolute surprise to most Australians. That for many Australians, they would be completely unaware of it, that this continues to be the case today. The findings highlighted in the report include racial exclusion, integration challenges, human rights abuses, not only but also in immigration and police detention, targeted surveillance, racial profiling, and these are just some of the issues they raise that people of African descent in Australia are experiencing on a regular basis. This report launched today by the Australian Advocacy Centre is a really constructive response to the litany of allegations set out by the UN. Too often we see these reports come out from the UN and then little follows from it. And that they're a record of what happens, but you don't always see that advocacy and that really structural push for change once you have that evidence base from the UN. So the authors of this report are really to be congratulated on the really practical approach they've taken to setting out how we move beyond just transparency and exposure of the problems towards change. Their recommendations start with education and awareness raising, but they are clear that this is needed at many levels, not only at the community, but also multi-levels of government, that this is necessary. The recommendations are really tailored and context-specific, and importantly, really note the need for co-design of new approaches. Again, too often what we see with these types of reports and policy change is that the report gets accepted and passed to government, and then the government focuses on how we develop policy and how we develop laws, and leaves the community out of it. So this is so important that we now have this evidence base and this important information from this report that will take that step forward around co-design. And while clearly the government has an important role to play here, it's also clear that it's not a problem that can simply be legislated away, and that setting up a framework for more equitable and inclusive Australia is just one necessary part of this process. And while there needs to be a targeted response that ensures specific measures are taken to address racism and the human rights abuses of select groups in Australia, including the people of African descent, now more than ever, and particularly in the wake of the referendum result last year, we need to think about more longer-term, a strategic approach to ensuring that all of our human rights in Australia are upheld all of the time. For many in Australia, human rights is something that applies to people over there, something overseas, but not necessarily that we think about it and think about what it means for us in Australia. Establishing a National Human Rights Act is one part of this strategy. It's an essential, if not sufficient part, but it is something that is looking at trying to how to bring in a group's voices in relation to the development of policy. This report touches on this sort of notion that Australia has long championed the concept of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is this philosophy that, in theory, celebrates diversity, promotes inclusion, and recognises the value that each individual, regardless of their background, brings to society. But far too often in Australia, multiculturalism turns into more like a buzzword. It's a veneer that's used to cover over the harsh reality of racism that continues to exist in this country. Education, as this report notes, will play a really pivotal role in challenging stereotypes and fostering a culture of acceptance. And this informative report demonstrates that addressing racism in Australia is still very much a work in progress. And I commend this report as a really practical mechanism that responds to the work that Dr. Barbara mentioned and sets out a clear pathway forward. And as she notes, this is a first step. Now comes the much harder task of implementation. But reports like this and academic reports like this are really important in providing that practical framework. They're taking the sort of the high-level findings of the United Nations and then providing a gap between what that means and how government might approach this issue. They're providing an opportunity for community to have input in it. And these types of reports provide you with an evidence base of where to go next. And so it's taking the work of the United Nations and translating it into a really practical path forward. So it's a really, really useful report in that sense. So I really, I congratulate the authors of this report and particularly also Noel for the work that he has done in setting this up and setting the stage for this. It's clear that the Centre is going to play a key role in articulating the gap between what people are experiencing and the response by policymakers. This report will very much spark an important discussion about the people of African descent in Australia and their experiences, and really ask questions about really what it means to live in a multicultural Australia. And that it's time for us to sort of dig down beneath that, accept the findings of the United Nations, and then work together to seek a more constructive path forward. Thank you.
Next, I'm honoured to introduce and welcome the Australian Human Rights Commissioner, Lorraine Finlay, to provide the government perspective and commitment to addressing human rights and equity for Australians and of African descent. Lorraine Finlay is the Human Rights Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission, commencing in this position in November 2021. In this role, Lorraine has particular responsibility for protecting and promoting fundamental rights and freedoms, including freedom of speech, religion, movement, and association. She also leads the work of the Commission in areas including business and human rights, modern slavery, asylum seekers and refugees, and technology and human rights. Prior to joining the Commission, Lorraine has worked as a lawyer and academic specializing in human rights and public law. Her past roles have included working as a senior trafficking specialist with the Australian Mission to ASEAN. An academic at Murdoch University, holds a dual master's in law from New York University and the National University of Singapore, where she studied as a Singaporean scholar. She has been actively involved in a variety of community organizations, including the board roles with Isha Multicultural Women's Health Services and National Council of Women. Welcome, Commissioner.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Good morning all. It's a real joy to be here today. And I would like to thank the Australian African Advocacy Centre for inviting me here today. Thank you, Noel, for all of the work that you and your team are doing. And I won't acknowledge all of the distinguished guests because the truth is I have to name each and every one of you because the work that you are all doing is incredible and something that is so important to the future of this country. I would like to begin by acknowledging and echoing the previous acknowledgements of the traditional owners, custodians of the lands on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend those respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. At the Australian Human Rights Commission, our mission is to promote, protect and respect human rights throughout Australia. I should emphasise that while we work with government, we don't present the perspective of government. We're Australia's national human rights institution, which means we're an independent agency that can work alongside all Australians to ensure that human rights principles are translated into action. The Australian Human Rights Commission in this role emphasises finding practical solutions to the issues that we know Australia faces in relation to human rights. We advocate for systemic change and we try to raise awareness in the community about the realities of the experiences that all individuals in Australia face in their day-to-day lives. Because of this, I'm so grateful to be here and to have the opportunity to be part of the launch of what is a really important report today, taking the findings of the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent that were made following their visit to Australia last December and trying to translate those into action, giving us a pathway forward in terms of how we can actually use that evidence, use those findings, use those principles to actually have a real impact on people's lives here in Australia. Before talking specifically about the report that we're here today to launch, I did want to make a more general comment, given that we're here on the International Day for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, about racism in Australia. When we talk about race, it's often done through the specific direct experiences of one group in our community, whether that be Australians of African descent or other ethnic groups. But when we do that, we sometimes forget to link it back into the broader context. And we lose sight of the broader impacts that racism has, not just directly on that one group, but in terms of undermining our broader social fabric and social cohesion. And so I think it's critically important that as we read this report, and as we think more broadly about our journey forward in terms of addressing racism in Australia, that we start at first principles. And that is that every single Australian should have the right to live freely and safely in this country. Every single Australian should have the right to live free from racism. And every single Australian should have the right for their dignity as a human being to be fully recognised. Racism needs to be consistently condemned, no matter who the particular target group happens to be, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or as we're talking today, the experiences of African Australians. Those first principles need to be kept in mind, and they then need to be translated into action. Our actions need to align with our values. The Working Group of Experts Country Report highlighted issues of racism, but went much further than that and highlighted a whole range of significant human rights issues that we're facing here in Australia. Professor Nolan, I think, made an apt comment when she said the broader Australian community would likely be surprised to hear some of those findings. But the truth is, nobody in this room would have been at all surprised to read the findings of the UN expert group. These are all issues that the Australian Human Rights Commission in various forms has consistently raised for many, many years. None of them are new, and that just highlights the challenge that really is ahead of us. We're committed in our work to trying to find a pathway forward to deliver real change. And I'm so excited to be here with you, Noel, and the team that you lead, and to strengthen our collaboration with all of the people in this room. What I would say to you, Noel, is as you move forward with this important work, our door is open, and we look forward to walking with you on the path that is ahead. But if I look at the specific issues that were raised by the UN Working Group and that are addressed in this framework response, whether it be at the Australian Human Rights Commission addressing racism through the development of the National Anti-Racism Framework. This is work specifically welcomed by the UN Working Group in their findings as an example of best practice. And this is work that is a core focus of our brand new Race Discrimination Commissioner, who only commenced in the role earlier this month, and who I know is very focused on ensuring that we deliver a framework that will deliver real results for Australians. Our work in advancing the human rights of asylum seekers and refugees, which includes the Commission conducting regular inspections of immigration detention centres and consistently advocating for Australia to address the human rights concerns that, again, have not been raised for the first time in this report, but have been raised again and again and again in terms of practices around indefinite detention, offshore processing, and upholding normal family obligations. Our work in the Australian Human Rights Commission to address human rights violations in places of detention, including police, immigration, and prison custody, and to encourage Australia to deliver on its international promises by fully implementing the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, or OPCAT. Our work in the area of technology and human rights, which sometimes doesn't get linked in to this discussion, but is incredibly important in terms of ensuring that as a nation we embrace the opportunities ahead of us in terms of artificial intelligence and facial recognition technology, but at the same time recognise the very real harms that can be caused to individuals and to community groups through things like excessive surveillance and racial profiling. The final example that I'd like to highlight is a project that we are just beginning at the Australian Human Rights Commission, and that's to look at the better development of emergency response frameworks in Australia, with the first phase of this project evaluating the human rights impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic response in Australia. This will include public consultations to help us better understand the human rights impacts of COVID, but more importantly, the barriers that were faced by different groups throughout the community and the disproportionate impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic had. We know that different groups were affected in different ways, that different groups experienced different issues, and it's incredibly important for us that in looking at how Australia can move forward and can best address future emergencies, we hear the stories of all Australians, we understand what those impacts were, and we look at how we can put human rights at the centre of future emergency responses. Each of those examples directly correlates to issues that were raised by the UN Working Group and that are found in the framework report that we're launching today. Each of these examples highlight issues where the impacts have been disproportionately felt by minority communities, and in particular, disproportionately felt by Australians of African descent. And I have to admit that when you look at those list of issues, when you read the UN Working Group report, when you read the framework report, when I reflected on our work that's relevant to the issues that were raised, it's really easy to become overwhelmed by the challenges that we face. It's very easy to become disillusioned, and it's really easy to start questioning as an individual whether you can actually make a difference in terms of addressing these enormous challenges that are ahead of us. And that's why I think the report that we're launching today is so important, and why I'm so excited by the work that you're doing. Because this report doesn't just highlight the issues. It doesn't just go over the claims that have been made again and again for so many years. What it actually does is take the next step and say, what do we need to do to actually deliver change? What do we need to do to get beyond the words and the principles, and actually think about how we can impact the lives of Australians and make real improvements on the ground? It takes that next step of asking, how can we actually deliver on the promises of human rights principles and put them into action? These are systemic issues that are really difficult to address, but as a nation, we cannot afford to put them in the too-hard basket, or to say that they're too complicated, or to say that it has to wait for another day. So I really congratulate the African Australian Advocacy Centre for taking that next step, for outlining a strategic roadmap of what needs to be done to translate the promise of human rights into reality. And for asking us all to think about how we can work together to not just talk about human rights, but to make sure that all Australians are able to actually experience their human rights being respected and being protected in practice. When you stop to think about where we are in the world today, all of the conflict and all of the challenges. It's really easy to get lost in that. It's very easy to not see a pathway forward. But this report to me is a timely reminder that individuals and communities can make a very real and substantial difference. Both the UN Working Group report and the response that we're launching today clearly highlight the very real and the substantial human rights issues in Australia today that impact disproportionately upon our African Australian communities. But the overall message that I took from reading the report was a really positive one. Australia, like all countries, is far from perfect when it comes to human rights. But reports like this highlight a willingness to be open about our shortcomings, a willingness to call out the work that we still need to do, and a commitment to work together to build a country that is fairer and better for every single Australian, not only now, but into the future. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted just over 75 years ago, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was one of the leading lights in ensuring it was developed and adopted, said something really important. She said many things that were really important, but the one that particularly resonates with me is she said, human rights actually begin in small places close to home. Those words resonate with me because they remind me that human rights only come to life when we make them part of our daily lives. When we don't just talk about them, but we put them into action, not just in big ways, but in all of the individual small interactions that we have with each other and the way we choose as individuals and communities to live our daily lives. That's what this report ultimately is all about. And the continuing work of the African Australian Advocacy Centre helps to find a pathway forward to bring human rights to life in our daily lives for all Australians. Your roadmap will help guide us on that journey, and I thank everyone who's involved in the work that you're doing, not only in producing this report, but all of the things that you do in the community and the work that you're going to do in the future to help turn those promises into reality. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Commissioner Lorraine Findlay, for your commitment to addressing human rights and equity for all Australians. Next, I would like to welcome Professor Alfia Pasami Inesidi, the Post Vice Chancellor of Western Sydney University Engagement and Advancement, who will speak about the academic and community engagement in the context of social justice. Professor Alfia Pasami Inesidi is the Pro Vice Chancellor Engagement and Advancement, Chair of Academic Senate, Chair of Western Sydney University Social Justice Network, Professor of Sociology, and President of the Australian Sociological Association. She has worked as an Associate Pro Vice Chancellor, Director of Sydney City Campus, and was responsible for the creation of the Master of Research. Alfia is a Springer co-editor for the series Religion, Spirituality and Health. A social scientific approach. She was the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Sociology in 2013 until 2016, as well as the co-creator of the Risk Society's thematic group within the Australian Sociological Association. Her recent work includes the Digital, Social, Religion and Belief, as well as upcoming edited volume of Health Sociology. Alfia is currently involved in ongoing research and focuses on higher education, risk, society, religion, digital, sociology, and methodologies. Welcome.
I'm so sorry you had to hear that extended little abstract there of my life that makes me feel very old. It's a little bit dated, but I would like to say Pujari Gamarawa, and that's a hello in the language of derived, which is where I live and work in the lands of Western Sydney, but very much willing to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded lands of the Gadigal of the Eora Nation. So my name is Althea Pasamayanesi. I am all those other things, but I'm very grateful to be dedicated to the work of leading strategic engagement at Western Sydney University, very much geared toward the commitment to co-producing, which is a lot of what we've been hearing today. You can hear in the report the types of solutions that we're dealing with and the interconnected challenges of our society. Thank you very much, Noel, for inviting me to be a part of this launch on Harmony Day as we put forward, or you put forward, this framework for change presented by the African Australian Advocacy Centre. I really do want to highlight many of what we've heard today through these amazing lineup of speakers, the transformative power of a synergetic collaboration among universities, government, and communities, especially when we are talking about the spheres of social justice. This model, sometimes referred to as a triple helix model, so if you hear me say that, that's what I'm referring to, that beautiful sort of interconnection, is really pivotal as we make use of this really important work that's been done in the report, We Belong Here, Framework for Human Rights and Equity for Australians of African Descent. This landmark initiative embodies our collective efforts toward that more equitable society. It's not just a document. I was really pleased. I got a hold of it last night. I was reading through it. It really is a call for action, for unity, and for justice, serving as a reminder of the collaborative efforts, as Professor Nolan points to, needed to address these long-standing issues that have been unpacked for us. When the United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent provided Australia with recommendations, they were urgent and clear. They called upon us to adopt national strategies aimed at combating racial discrimination, promoting diversity, and ensuring the education sector actively fosters an understanding and appreciation of African heritage. These recommendations lay the groundwork for a society that upholds the principles of equality and human dignity for all members. And that report, this launch, the partnership that Noel so actively seeks, I really admire the work that you do and how active you are in really promoting the need for that triple helix model. One individual can do a lot, but the combination of community groups, government, universities, industry coming together will actually enable us to make sure that this framework is fostering the type of social change that it's advocating for. In response to these recommendations, universities can very much leverage their expertise, their research capabilities, their teaching, but it has to be done collectively with community, so it's a co-development. So we can shed more light on the experiences and challenges faced by the Australians of African descent, developing those educational programs that foster that deeper understanding of cultural diversity and inclusion. This is where the We Belong Here initiative becomes a beacon of what we aim to achieve, creating an academic and social environment that actively promotes human rights, equity, and justice for all. If I think about my own university, which is embedded in a region that is one of the most diverse regions of Australia, it very much is at that forefront of championing social justice and equity. And just earlier this month, on International Women's Day, we launched a report on women's participation rates in Greater Western Sydney, And what we found there, just to show you that space matters, that the types of discrimination that we saw come through in that United Nations report that the framework we're launching today is addressing. One of the things that was uncovered is that the lived experience of women of African descent can be markedly different in the region of Western Sydney than in the rest of Sydney. So even when we looked at the labour force participation rate of women born in Africa, we were seeing that as a rate of 42% in Western Sydney. But when we looked at that in terms of the rest of Sydney, that rate jumped up to 72%. Now there's a lot of reasons that will contribute to that, but it's that type of very important work, which is grounded in community, presented to an audience of government and community stakeholders, that we hope will make the types of changes that we want to see to the lived experience of individuals. So the government's role in this triple helix model is crucial. It is through policies and legislation that the foundational changes needed to support equity and human rights can be implemented. The government, by adopting and acting on the UN Working Group's recommendations, although I recognize the challenges faced in that, and supporting initiatives like We Belong Here, will demonstrate a commitment to these values. At the core of our efforts is the community, rich in diversity, yet often faced with challenges that hinder its full participation in society. True engagement means listening to the voices, as this report does, within these communities, understanding their experiences, and working collaboratively to address their concerns. So this initiative exemplifies this approach and provides a platform for the voices of Australians of African descent, ensuring that their perspectives are integral to the conversations and actions that shape their future. In conclusion, I really do congratulate the contributors to this report. Again, as others have said within the speeches, the door of the Social Justice Network of Western Sydney University is very much open to this work and working collaboratively together so that we can ensure the framework that has been crafted really is that clear directive for collective action. As we move forward, let us embrace this model not just as a strategy for development, but as a commitment to our shared humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Alfield. Next, I would like to invite and welcome Dr. Gatomi Kadwiri and Dr. Sarah Williams and Masepo Malala, who will give an overview of the report. Gatomi Kadwiri is an associate professor in the Faculty of Health, a fellow at the University at the Center of Children and Young People, president of the peak body of Australian Women and Gender Studies, and practicing psychotherapist. Gatomi is one of Australia's leading Afro-diasporic scholars whose award-winning interdisciplinary research investigates the intersecting topics of racial trauma, belonging, blackness, and migranthood. She has attracted over $1.5 million in competitive research funding and published over 80 traditional and non-traditional research outputs, including the books African Womanhood and Incontinent Bodies and Afro-Diasporic Identities in Australia. As a community leader, she is the founder and director of Healing Together, a service that provides accessible, culturally and sensitive therapeutic support for people impacted by racial trauma. Dr. Sarah Williams has worked as an intercultural community development practitioner and youth worker for over a decade. Soon to graduate from her PhD, Sarah's research methodology involves action research, investigating creative sites for social change regarding racial social justice issues. Her interest in arts-based development projects is driven by the question of how being born to stand out manifests. Sarah is co-founder of Footprint Enterprises, an organization which focuses on creating spaces to bring about social change through the creative arts. Sarah has previously served on a number of boards, peak body multicultural committees, and currently works as a lecturer and research and evaluation lead at Mahana Culture and RMIT University. Masepo Malala, a PhD candidate at Western Sydney University, is at the forefront of research exploring faith's role in climate resilience among marginalized communities. With a Master of Research and background in environmental science, she co-authored a report for the UN on racial justice, leveraging her experience in public and private sectors to deliver sustainable solutions. At Western Sydney University, she mentors students promoting academic equity and inclusion. Passionate about social justice and environment sustainability, Masepo also volunteers in local sports. Enriching her engagement, she is multilingual with aspirations to expand her linguistic repertoire to include Darug. Welcome.
Yes, I'm not sure the both of us
we can't fit. I am a little bit tall.
Hi everyone, my name's Sarah. I've travelled from Naarm, Melbourne last night. This is a national conversation, so thank you so much for having us today. I was reflecting on coming here. One of my mentors is Mark Yedeka-Polson. He's a Bundjalung man from northern Queensland, and Mark developed the intercultural framework, which talks about the riverbed as the space between where people across cultures and difference come together to negotiate their worldview. The reason why I was sharing this is Mark talks about the idea of the eagle work, the overview work, people who are visionaries. He also talks about the idea of the ant work, the people who are coming to make things happen. So today is kind of that intertwining of the eagle work. I can see all of you being eagles, but also some of us are the ants, the people who are making things happen. So thanks for having us. Masepo, myself, and Noel and others were chatting about what to title this report. As mentioned, there's lots of catchwords thrown around in Australia, the lands we call Australia. One of them is social inclusion sometimes. We're like, do we put that word in, or do we put human rights and equity for people of African descent? So that idea that we belong here is not a question, can we belong here? It's an emphatic, we belong here. It doesn't need an exclamation mark as such. It should be inherent that this is happening in Australia. So thanks for coming along for this important occasion. It is personal for me in particular. I was reflecting when writing the report with our colleagues. In Dandenong in 2007, there was a young man, Liat Goy, who was murdered in Noble Park. He was of South Sydney's background. The immigration minister at the time mentioned that South Sydney's Australians and broader African diaspora weren't integrating into Australian society. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because when that happened in 2007, I remember the Australian Human Rights Commission had also released a report, We Belong Here. Oh, sorry, that's our report. In our own words. This was over a decade ago, and this report that we're writing 14 years later is still quite similar. Nothing much has changed since that report. So a roadmap with our colleagues is so important. I just wanted to acknowledge Kathleen here from Western Sydney University, Kirsten, who's sitting next to you, Noel Clement from RMIT University, who also serves the Red Cross and others, Dr. Kathy Edwards, and of course our two RMIT social work students who are not here but did the groundwork, the ant work for this report, and also our research assistant, Masepo Malala. It's an amazing team, and we bring that concept of Ubuntu together, that interconnectedness. So moving on, what is the report? What does it involve? Today we're going to launch it, you're going to have a link. And we wanted to make that a public access link so that civil society, people in the room can access it and engage with the findings. So we went on a journey after the UN working group of experts of people of African descent came to Australia. We were interested first of all with their initial recommendations, which was an interim report. I don't know about you, but I was so impressed by how quickly they were able to integrate at least 15 different civil society, government, stakeholder conversations around the nation into this report very quickly. So I want to commend Dr. Barbara and her team. The reason why I share that was because when we were watching Noel, we supported Noel to go to Geneva to the Human Rights Council, we were watching the Australian government ambassador respond to the findings. There was kind of like, we understand that systemic racism occurs in Australia. That was kind of accepted, where it used to be the R word, the word we couldn't say. But what was kind of, I felt, watered down was the fact that when the UN visits Australia, often it's suggested they came really quickly, they only stayed a few days. How could they possibly understand the human rights situation of people of African descent in Australia? So this roadmap articulates the process that the AAAC and other stakeholders went on, the level of consultation that occurred. I was at a consultation in Melbourne. People affected by the tower lockdown in Melbourne were there sharing their own lived experience. I was able to share of the deaths of young South Sudanese Australians, and that's why I wear my scarf today. Because last year at the end of the year I was flying to Botswana, South Africa and Zimbabwe, and another funeral of a young person was occurring. So this is very personal. Today is a big picture eagle overview, but each of you has a lived experience story, many stories that I hope you can share. So with the framework, we divided it into sections to actually share what was the community consultation process like, to respond to that rebuke, I guess, that it was just a quick visit. How could we possibly know? We mapped it also with some of the findings, working with people such as Kirsten and Dr. Kuthomi Gutwiri to look at some of the literature. Literature was scattered throughout the report, but we also have Australian scholars of African descent who are prominent, such as Kuthomi, who have already been doing this for 10 years. So we use that evidence base to map the report. And finally, Seppo is going to chat around some of the local responses at the Western Sydney University event, which we saw the video from earlier. So I'll hand it over to Seppo, and we'll finish off with some of the key recommendations. Thank you.
Scripted. So, Dumelang, Sanbonani. Yes. Sawubona is an expression in Zulu to say, I see you. I am giving you humanity. I am acknowledging your presence. So I want to acknowledge your presence today. We have heard from absolutely wonderful speakers who are on point about the report, such that I feel like my notes are not going to be doing any justice because it's already covered really well and in detail. So as Sarah has spoken, we have undertaken a generous exercise in trying to map how these recommendations can be actualized into actions, turned into something that actually gives us purpose and a sense of direction in working through some of the challenges we face. And I would say us as a people of African descent living in Australia. I am an Australian citizen, but you can rest assured that in many places people have to query me about my presence in Australia. People have to query me about, where do you come from? And I say, I come from Kempsey. Really where do you come from? We know that story, right? All right, so I won't go into that story. So Sarah, if you don't mind doing the slides for me. Thank you. So as Sarah has mentioned, we have, sorry, I'm trying to work this, and I was shown how to do it because it's really important for the sound. Yeah, I think I'm there. Excellent. So when the United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent came to Australia, I was one of the participants in the session that was organized at Western Sydney University, where I am a student. And so some of the highlights from those, the report's findings, you know, Ms. Finlay has already spoken to the fact that it might be surprising to many in Australia, but it is not surprising to us because this is our daily life, this is our experience on a daily basis. We are challenged significantly as people of African descent in integrating, in being seen, in being acknowledged, in being seen as belonging in Australia. Human rights violations are quite prevalent amongst our people in the police, in immigration, in prison custody. We, you know, do not get what we deserve, basically, and that's being recognized. But there's an evidence base for that. It's not just us saying that, it's not just us speaking from lived experience. These are people who have expertise in analyzing these issues, and they've come to that conclusion as well. We are over-surveilled, there's racial profiling. I can speak to my son who's here, who was racially profiled by police at just under 11, 12, where police stopped him, frisked him, and didn't call out and say, "Mom," and I was livid. Just going, how could they be doing that? He's just a child who'd forgotten something, ran home. Simply the exercise of running home was enough to draw private police to stop him. Anyway, there's lots of hate speech. We have seen with recent events happening in Queensland where there was that unfortunate incident of a grandma who was unfortunately murdered, that we have had people come out and say people of African descent do not belong. We have had people of African descent seriously living under siege in Australia, and out of one occurrence, and it's significant to mirror that, or to sort of juxtaposition that with what has happened in Victoria, where a similar incident has occurred. A young man has gone into trouble. There's no one who's hunting everybody about it, but when it's the African people, it is clear that there's a fault line there, right? And the Australian public narrative does problematize race. People do not want to talk about racism. It's that race, no, do not talk about that. Let's just talk about you. Let's talk about why you don't get it. You know, we speak English here. But Sawana is my language too. And it's a valid language. It's a recognized language. And it's okay to speak it. Sorry if you speak English only. I can speak more. You know, get on. Learn how to speak. We have spoken about the educational challenges, and I was really pleased to hear Professor Posamai talk to those issues as well as Professor Nolan, because institutions of higher learning have got a role to play, and we are really pleased to see the Western Sydney University Social Justice Network step up into that space, fill that vacuum, call on it, and work on actually addressing issues that affect a lot of the community in Western Sydney. Many of our students, and I say our students, I'm a student at Western Sydney, many of our students at Western Sydney are people from diverse backgrounds. They do include people who are first-time university goers in the family. So there is that space to begin to build that capacity. And I'll talk a little bit about the issues around building social capacity, building capacity for communities and enabling communities to participate in a meaningful way in society, in the economy, in educational setting. There are issues with mental health and trauma treatment. We heard from many in the community. I walked out of the first consultation in tears because of what people had said, because of how people felt they were being treated in Australia, where there's just lots and lots of trauma, and the organizations charged with responding to this trauma are actually re-traumatizing people and reinforcing their trauma. So there's just this loop where it's just really secular. We've got nowhere to turn, and so it is time to actually start challenging those issues and addressing them in a systemic way. And of course, I do not want to be doom and gloom. The UN Working Group of Experts did find some good. There's good practices in Australia, and so we've got a platform to build from. It's not just there's all this negativity or these negative things that are happening, these systemic things that are happening. There are other systemic things that we can actually start leveraging on and launching from to be able to address some of the concerns that we are seeing. So there's a number of issues here that have been identified, and I won't go into each individual section here because you can read that in the report, but it's the fact that we do have the Human Rights Commission doing some stellar work on anti-racism. I've been following them, and if you look at their posts in relation to Harmony Day and the harms of Harmony Day, it is very clear that we need to actually recognize that today is Sharpeville Day in South Africa, the day that the Boers or the apartheid government massacred people like me. I am here today on the back of those people who died, challenging the system and saying we cannot live under siege. We can actually challenge it. as a group of people, and they did that. And so the United Nations recognized that particular day, and today we need to acknowledge that it is the International Day for the Elimination of Racism and Racial Discrimination, and it is on the back of the work that was being done in South Africa in Sharpeville in 1960. And that there are community organizations that are willing to work with us. And I know that Noel in AAAC has been working with a number of organizations. We've got people like Dr. Sam, Professor Sandra here, who are actually lending their expertise and saying we can work together. And this is the thing that I want to bring today, is the fact that we cannot do it alone. Dr. Atem's statistics on people of African descent suggest that we're just like 2% of the population in Australia, or thereabouts, give or take, because there's no data being collected that is meaningful. So if we work with the official data, we've got a small minority. So we do need allies, we do need people to work with us in actually addressing these issues that affect a small minority, a small population. And if we address them, imagine how wonderful life could be.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. So what do we seek to achieve with the framework? We're starting a dialogue. And we are pleased that many of you are here. We are pleased that organizations like the the Australian Human Rights Commission are here. We are pleased that the University of Western Sydney is here. We are pleased that RMIT is here. We are pleased that University of New South Wales, where I graduated my other masters, they are here. They are wanting to be part of the conversation. They are saying, we've got DFED here today. Everyone is coming to the table, so we want to have these conversations. But most importantly, we want to take decisive and strategic action. And that's one of the calls that's come out through, that we want to be acting. We just don't want to be talking. These are just not recommendations and a book to file. It's actually stimulating action. Thanks, Reverend. Do you want to share? Yeah. All right, I'll let Sarah take this one.
So Seppo just mentioned some of those strategic actions in terms of working with legislative alignment, working with the policies. We have worked on a number of policies that were reviewed in the recommendations, so I won't go to that. We're going to talk about civil society involvement now, and I just wanted to, if you go to the next slide, kind of recommend Emerald, who made the video earlier. Sometimes these conversations happen in a room like this, but not always can people engage from the general public, people of African descent across Australia. So that's the next step for the AAAC, is to help this to become public access and for us to make this a live document to interact with. So one of the first recommendations, we almost wanted to go straight to suggesting a white paper document for the government in particular to spend some time resourcing their own internal review of government policies in relation to human rights. So some of the calls to action are specifically funding focused, resource focused. Many of us are using our work plans. We're doing it out of hours, not so much embedded in the work that we're already doing, which is rather interesting. So funding is important. This national white paper would then be that eagle work to some extent for the government. But when we were writing the report, we were trying to chat with Noel and others, like, what's the tone of this report? What's this conversation? Is it antagonistic or is it relational? And we wanted it to be a relational process. And so some of the AAAC members have gone to Parliament to have lovely meals and conversations. So that's the invitation today. Keep clicking. So here's some of the beautiful pictures of what it's like when we do have conversations around around the table. It's not quite clicking, but let's go. So as I mentioned, Noel and the members of AAAC are all volunteers. And this work is actually timely. In order to achieve some of these recommendations, AAAC has the lived experience, but also the know-how, how to tend to the solutions. We don't necessarily need to search far and wide for how these actions should be implemented. So one recommendation is to resource AAAC
3 to 5 even, the more the merrier. To work on this work longitudinally. The next aspect is that the AAAC launched a survey, a community survey last year to seek membership from the broader Australian society. They have many members, but we kind of looked at the recommendations and put them into 7 different categories to try to now start to hone in on action. We've done the eagle work, but now we need to start to look at how to respond. So those 7 action areas, it's recommended that 7 focus groups occur around Australia. People who are from academic backgrounds, people from the AAAC will be chairing these 7 different areas, and civil society, other members such as yourselves, have filled in the survey if you haven't yet. The link's on the website where you can start to interact with your interest area in the report. So ta-da, let's launch the report.
Yes.
And then we have Kathomi's video to finish up. So we only have a couple of printed copies. We have some up the back. And we wanted to encourage everyone to head to the website where the report has been launched. We were able to link it to academic processes so that we can cite this report and so that the work can be acknowledged. But the idea of making it open access is a very important one. So happy to chat about that more. So let's give a round of applause for everyone.
Yeah, and I guess it's our greatest pleasure really to launch this report. And with this report, we're simply saying that we're shifting the dial from recommendations to strategic actions, and the report is very clear around which areas. So members of civil society, government, academia, there's those thematic areas that Sarah spoke to that we can actually start picking on and just start working together to move the work forward. We do have the video from Catholic which sort of sums up the report in a way towards closing. We're almost there. This is here copy at the back, I'm sure. It is, I'm not sure how we are doing for time about, because the idea was that we would also have a bit of a Q&A right at the end, and if anyone wanted to ask questions, it might just be, in a sense, something that we do in the mingle and tingle exercise. Yes. Thank you. This is Professor, Associate Professor Katrina Twilly summing up the report.
She's going to hate that.
Sure, what happened?
We're not in a
experiences of racial dignity for our community members and to be able to participate in telling the stories of Africans in Australia with complexity. So what we want to do is move away from experiences of singularity, of monolithic stories, and embrace a multi-layered perspective in telling our stories and being able to experience the complexity, the beauty, the challenges, but also the humanity that exists within us. It is indeed my hope that we'll all join together, join hands to build an inclusive community, both in community and in government, to be able to expand our knowledges and to expand the beauty that is the Australian society. Thank you very much.
I would like to express a gratitude to you all, the distinguished guests, for your support, the partners, RMIT University, Western Sydney University, and all of you for the great work and efforts that you have done. Now is time for refreshment, but before that, I would like to get everyone together for a group photo, so that's something that will be happening, and then enjoy refreshment and mingling. Thank you very much.